Picture this scenario. You're watching the news and you see another leader making a decision that will obviously backfire. You're scrolling social media and your well-meaning aunt shares another conspiracy theory. You're at work and your coworker confidently gives advice that would bankrupt anyone who follows it. What do all these people have in common? They're not evil masterminds twirling their mustaches. There's something far more dangerous. They have catastrophically poor judgment, but they're absolutely convinced they're right. Take the Chernobyl disaster of 1986. Many blame the Soviet Union's secrecy and dysfunction, and rightly so. But the true catalyst wasn't sabotage or evil intent. It was experienced engineers running a safety test they thought was harmless, supervisors pushing for production targets, and officials delaying evacuation to avoid panic. Every one of them believed they were doing the right thing. And that's what made it so catastrophic. This wasn't evil. It was something far more common and far more dangerous. Sincere stupidity. This is precisely the danger Italian historian Carlo Cipolla highlighted. That the most harmful people aren't those with evil intent, but those who unknowingly create disaster through their misguided confidence. Now, let's examine the framework that explains why this pattern is so persistent and dangerous. In 1976, Italian economic historian Carlo Cipolla published what would become one of the most penetrating analyses of human decision-making ever written, The Basic Laws of Human Stupidity. Cipolla's first law: everyone always and inevitably underestimates the number of people with consistently poor judgment in circulation. Even the most realistic among us overestimate human rationality, assuming that most people will make reasonable decisions. We project our own thought processes onto others. Cipolla's second law: the probability of poor judgment is independent of any other characteristic. Intelligence, education, social status, wealth, none of these protect against systematic errors in reasoning. Self-defeating actors are distributed equally across all segments of society, from the homeless to Nobel Prize winners. The third law: the core definition: a person exhibits this destructive pattern when they cause losses to others while deriving no gain, and possibly incurring losses themselves. This distinguishes poor judgment from mere selfishness or ignorance. A selfish person, a bandit, at least benefits from their actions, making their behavior predictable. Someone with poor judgment creates lose-lose situations while thinking they're being helpful. The fourth law: rational people consistently underestimate the damaging power of those with poor judgment. We fail to prepare for the chaos that self-defeating decisions can unleash precisely because their actions seem so illogical. We think, surely no one would actually do that, and then we're blindsided when they do exactly that. The fifth law: an individual with consistently poor judgment represents the most dangerous category of person. More dangerous than criminals, more dangerous than the corrupt, because their behavior is unpredictable and often appears virtuous. This is the key insight that changes everything. Cipolla's analysis becomes particularly illuminating when he categorizes all human actions based on their outcomes for both the actor and others around them. Understanding these categories helps us predict behavior and design better systems. Intelligent actors create win-win situations. These are civilization's builders who solve problems in ways that lift everyone up. Jonas Salk refused to patent the polio vaccine, saying, "Could you patent the sun?" Tim Berners-Lee could have become incredibly wealthy by patenting the World Wide Web, but chose to make it freely available. These people understand that creating value for others ultimately creates more value for themselves. Bandits harm others for personal gain. While morally questionable, their behavior follows rational patterns we can predict and defend against. A CEO cutting safety corners for quarterly bonuses or contractors using cheap materials for higher profits. Their self-serving actions are manageable through regulations and oversight because we anticipate this behavior. Helpless individuals harm themselves while benefiting others. These chronic self-sacrificers give without considering consequences, often enabling destructive systems. Think of colleagues who always accept extra work until they burn out, or parents who sacrifice their well-being so completely they eventually can't help their children. Then there are the stupids, people who consistently create lose-lose situations while believing they're helpful. They harm both themselves and others with a remarkable consistency. During measles outbreaks, some parents refuse vaccines, fearing a link to autism, even though that claim's been debunked. They're not trying to cause harm. They're just scared. But their decision helps the disease spread. Their kids get sick, other people's babies get sick. The parents gain nothing and end up hurting everyone, including themselves. The Dutch Tulip Mania of 1637 perfectly illustrates this. Ordinary citizens sold homes and businesses to buy tulip bulbs, genuinely believing they were securing their family's prosperity. These weren't greedy speculators. They were responsible parents who thought they were making smart investments. Their good intentions created one of history's first economic bubbles, destroying thousands of families' savings. And here's the crucial insight. Stupidity is more dangerous than banditry, because it's unpredictable and often disguised as virtue. When you face a bandit, their motives are clear. You can prepare or defend yourself. But stupid people act like chaos agents. They may support policies that harm their own families or spread dangerous misinformation, all while genuinely believing they're doing good. What makes this pattern particularly destructive is how it multiplies. Unlike malicious behavior that creates opposition, poor judgment often appears virtuous. When your trusted neighbor shares misinformation out of genuine concern, you're more likely to believe it than if it came from an obvious scammer. Research on belief persistence shows that people with poor reasoning skills become more convinced when encountering contradictory evidence. They resolve cognitive dissonance by dismissing challenges to their beliefs, creating an armor of wrongness that strengthens with each attack. The Salem witch trials demonstrate this dynamic perfectly. Community members genuinely believed they were protecting neighbors from supernatural threats while systematically destroying their own social fabric. Each execution seemed to validate their fears, creating a feedback loop of destruction driven by good intentions. What Cipolla termed stupidity often stems from emotional drivers rather than pure cognitive limitations. Fear, identity protection, and social belonging frequently override rational analysis. This explains why domain-specific stupidity exists. A brilliant engineer might make excellent technical decisions but fall for obvious financial scams. A successful CEO might navigate complex markets while sharing political misinformation on social media. Poor judgment isn't always a fixed trait. It emerges when people operate outside their expertise or when emotions run high. There's also a crucial distinction between individual poor judgment and systems that promote it. Sometimes people aren't lacking reasoning ability. They're trapped in systems designed to exploit cognitive vulnerabilities. Recent research reveals that our brains are designed to protect existing beliefs rather than seek truth. When information challenges our worldview, the brain's threat detection activates. The response isn't careful evaluation. It's finding ways to dismiss contradictory evidence. If poor judgment is both persistent and dangerous, how do we build sustainable institutions? The answer lies not in expecting people to reason better, but in designing systems that minimize the damage poor decisions can cause while maximizing the benefits of good judgment. Premortems in project planning force teams to imagine failure scenarios before they occur, helping identify potential problems when they can still be prevented. This simple technique acknowledges that even smart people miss obvious problems when they're excited about a project. Wikipedia's citation requirements create quality control even when editors have strong biases. By requiring verifiable sources, the system compensates for individual limitations while harnessing collective knowledge. Aviation's checklist protocols prevent experienced pilots from making simple but catastrophic errors. Even experts follow step-by-step procedures because human memory is unreliable under stress. Democratic institutions themselves exemplify this approach. They don't assume voters are perfectly rational. They assume voters will often make poor decisions and build in mechanisms like separation of powers, term limits, and judicial review to prevent any single bad decision from destroying the entire system. The most important insight from Cipolla's work may be the need for intellectual humility. His laws suggest that we all participate in poor judgment more often than we'd like to admit. The people who will successfully navigate the future aren't those who expect humans to be perfectly rational, but those who understand human limitations and design around them with wisdom and compassion. This requires a kind of moral complexity. The French aristocracy before the Revolution weren't primarily evil. They were largely people who had inherited systems they didn't understand and made well-intentioned but catastrophically poor decisions that led to their own destruction. Perhaps most importantly, we need to recognize that cognitive vulnerability is a shared human condition. Understanding our collective susceptibility to error isn't cause for despair. It's the foundation for building more resilient and compassionate institutions. When we accept that poor judgment is a persistent feature of human societies, we can work to create systems that harness our collective intelligence while protecting against our individual and collective failures of reasoning. Think about your own experience. Where have you encountered stupidity-resistant systems that actually work? Maybe it's a workplace policy that prevents common mistakes. These examples matter because they show us that we can design around human limitations without giving up on human potential. Understanding that the most dangerous people aren't evil, but simply prone to systematic errors in judgment changes everything. The question isn't how to eliminate poor judgment. It's how to build systems wise enough to work despite it. And if that idea struck you, consider sharing this video. Wisdom doesn't spread on its own. It travels person to person.